Okay, welcome everybody to a brief class on questions, which are not easy in English. You can't just use intonation for a question. You have to use auxiliary verbs. Well, there is an exception that we will look at in a second when there is no auxiliary verb, and we will look at that in a second. I don't think that's very easy. But firstly, I want you to concentrate on this particular order, because this is the order of words when you make a question in English. You need the question word at the start, and that's the what, where, who, when, why, how. Yeah, and you can see some of them down there. Then you need the auxiliary verb. Then you need the subject of the sentence, the subject of the verb. And then you have the main verb. And right at the end, you have the preposition. Okay, because and I really want to emphasize this because I know that in a lot of languages you put the preposition at the start. You say, with whom do you live? Or about what are you talking? But we don't usually do that in English. In the past we did sometimes, I admit, but nowadays we don't do that, and you will sound quite strange if you start the question with the preposition. So try to put the preposition at the end of the question. So firstly, let's go through some typical questions, and you will have to be careful with the tenses as well, because there are a number of different tenses you need to use. And so if you're just asking somebody where they live, yeah, and notice I don't use an auxiliary verb there because it's not a question. I'm just saying if you're asking somebody where they live, there's no question there. So if you're asking someone where they live, you need to say, where do you live? Yeah, and that's the order of the question. That's the order of the words in any question. Question word, auxiliary, subject, and then infinitive here, because you always use an infinitive after do or did. Yeah, that's always true. You always use infinitive after do or after did. Okay, so where do you live? But where does he live? After does as well, it would be where does he live? Yeah, if we're changing the subject to a he, well then you'll need a does for the he. Where does he live? Where do you live? Where do they live? And we're following this particular order. Okay, now notice on the next one I have put whom and then a m in brackets, and this is because I'm well aware that very few native speakers use whom in their speech. Very few. I'd say maybe as few as 1% maximum, probably less than that, probably 0.1% of natives that actually use the word whom. But what's the difference? Well, who is the subject pronoun, whom is the object pronoun. And that means that technically whom is correct here when you say, if you're asking who they live with, and again, I don't use an auxiliary verb there because it's not a question. You say who or whom, and I would use whom in anything formal and academic because I'm well aware that it is the correct version, and you might want to show that you know that whom is the object pronoun. But if you want to just sound natural, don't worry about whom, because you are on the side of 99.9% of native speakers. So don't worry about it, guys. If it's an extra complication, and I know you're at the intermediate level, you might not want to know about whom yet. You might want to work on that at an advanced level, maybe. But I've got to be honest and say I very rarely use whom naturally. It very rarely comes out naturally. I normally have to think about it and force myself to say it.